Hello there, my name is Ismas. Welcome to another Blender 2.8 tutorial. So today we're going to be looking at something different. We're going to be trying the fluid and rigid body simulation in Blender 2.8. So what we're going to do is simulate a ball hitting a bucket. Let me see if I can try illustrating it here using the glaze this note pencil. So what we're going to try to do is simulate a bucket with let me first remove this with some water. Let's say maybe a ball comes and hit it, and then this bucket will fall and spill the water inside. So we are going to do two things here. So the ball hitting the bucket will be simulated using the rigid body simulator, and then the fluid will be using the fluid simulator. So this is going to be a two-part series, a two-part tutorial. So the first part we're going to do the rigid body simulation. You can do it at once, but it kind of hard because it creates a lot of artifacts, and the fluid starts intersecting with the rigid bodies. So that's why I do it separately, like we are going to see in the tutorial. So let's get started. Let me just create a new project here and turn on screen keys so that you can see the shortcuts I'm using. So yeah, let's start by making a simple bucket. It won't be something too complicated, so I'll just one important thing you have to note when you are working with rigid body and fluid simulation, the scale of your objects really matters. And so I went up and looked up the measurements for a bucket, and I think they were about, let me add, the radius was about, the circumference was about 30 centimeters, so which is about 15 centimeters, which is 0.15 meters. Yeah, so the scale really does matter because fluids behave differently at in large simulations scales. So let's extrude this up. At the height, you can just eyeball it because from the circumference or radius of the of your bucket. We're not going to be too detailed with the bucket. You can always switch out a more high detailed bucket if you want from this after you bake all the animation and the simulations. So this is going to be our bucket. Now for the ball, we are just going to use an icosphere. We can increase the resolution to 2 because if we just leave it at 1, you can see there are a lot of polygons here, and it won't behave like a ball when it starts resting. It will just trust me and put it at around 3 so that you have a more smooth surface, so that when it's bouncing around it can roll down like a real ball instead of rolling down, and because of these blocky surfaces it will start like behaving like a block instead of a smooth round sphere. So put it at 3, and we can scale it down to the size of a ball. I'm not sure what the size of a ball, so I'll just estimate it to be around here. So just so that I can see everything, I'll go on into shading and turn on random colors and maybe cavity and shadows so that we can identify you can see the different objects more clearly. You can also turn on smooth shading. You just use right click for that, and maybe turn on smooth shading for this as well. Let's add a plane. This will be our collision, our ground. So yeah. Now to turn these objects into rigid bodies, you can just go under to this last icon here and select the object you want to turn into a rigid body. Select the rigid body button here, and so you can see you have the different settings here. So and you have the rigid body type. So if an object is going to be a collision object, but it won't be movable, something like a wall or ground, you can set the type to passive, but if the object is going to be moving, say this ball is going to collide with this, so this will the bucket will obviously move, then that needs to be active. So also the ball needs to have the rigid body enabled, and also the type should be active. But because our flow is going to be non-movable, it will be in one place. We need to set it as a rigid body, but passive, so that it doesn't move, but can also interact with other objects. Other objects can interact with it, but it won't be able to move. So you might be confused with, sometimes this confuses a lot of people who are, even me sometimes, when you're just beginning out with rigid bodies, you might think that this collision setting here is also part of the rigid body system, but it's not. It only works in cloth simulation and particle simulation, so just be aware of that if you are not. Yes, so let's start simulating. So if you play right now, the ball will just fall down, and this, because it's already sitting on the ground, there won't be any action on it. So if you move it a bit up and you play, because it's also a rigid body, active rigid body, it will also just fall down and on the ground. And the ground, because the ground object, this plane, has a passive type of rigid body, it won't be moving, but it will also be considered in the simulation as an object to interact with. So let's just move this back to the ground. So because we want this ball to hit this object here, we need to give this ball an initial velocity, and you don't really have a setting for that in the rigid body systems, in the rigid body settings, as you can see. But what you can do under rigid body settings, you have this option animated, so it allows you to animate the object while keeping it keeping it in consideration while making the simulation. So it would still be interacting with the object, but gravity and other things, other forces within the rigid body world will not be affecting it, but the ball itself will be affecting the bucket. So let me try and show you what I mean here. So if I turn on the recording button here, set a keyframe there, maybe move to about 40, and move this in the x-axis to around there. You can see if we don't turn this animated on, these keyframes will not affect the rigid body, because this animation is being controlled by the rigid body system. So what you need to do is turn on animated, so that the keyframes override the rigid body world simulation. So let's go back and play. Now you can see that happens. You can also see that this is not behaving like in the way a bucket you would expect a bucket to behave. So if we play, you can see it bounces and then comes back. This is because the center of gravity is very low, and all the entire mass of the object is around that pivot point. So we need to recalculate the origin, so that it's in the center of the object. It's in the center of gravity. It's where you would consider where the object should have a center of gravity, because every object has a center of gravity, and this is where I won't bother explaining that. I'll just show you what to do. So I just right click and then set origin to geometry. This position now will be the center of gravity, and when you play this back, by the way, just playing back the timeline is the same as simulating the rigid body system. So you see, but now the problem is that it's just sliding on the floor. It's not. It's like the floor is really slippery. So we need to increase the gravity, the friction for these two objects. So if we select the plane and then go to rigid body settings, collisions, and you can increase the friction here. And if we play back now, You can see you're getting that. So I don't think this is not enough, so we can also come to the bucket itself and increase the its friction. So if we play back, let's see what happens. You see, there is that kind of I don't know how to call that. It's kind of choppy there. I think it's because this is still set to animated. So you can see the ball animation is not really realistic in terms of how rigid body objects behave. So yeah, because it's being controlled by the animation system instead of the rigid body system. But we still want to have that initial velocity provided by the animation system. So what we can do, every setting you see here that has this dot here means that that setting can be animated. So we can have this setting here animated switched on to around here, so that we get that initial velocity, and then we can click on this to set a keyframe for the animation, and just one frame after that we can switch off that animation and also make sure that you mark that keyframe. You can see the two keyframes that we have set, and if we go back and forth, you can see we have this still checked, and if we go to the second keyframe, you can see now it's unchecked. So this will allow the rigid body system to take control over the animation of this object so that it can behave like a real rigid body object. And before this keyframe, when we still have the animation on, the animated setting on, this will the animation system will be overriding the rigid body settings. But when the rigid body world picks up the animation, it will also take in consideration the initial velocity of the object. So it will have that kind of inertia, that force pushing it forward. So let's play back and see. And that's all you need to do. You just need to animate this animation setting. So let's play. You can see that's what we have. But the problem is that the initial velocity is not high enough. That's why you can see the animation itself is also non-convexive, because it's just dropping off, because by the time the rigid body system picks up the animation, the object doesn't have enough initial velocity to kind of continue that projectile from its initial position. So the velocity it has here is not enough for it to continue in that projection to make it a real projection, physical projection that you would expect for this kind of object to have. So what we can do is maybe, let's say, so these two are the keyframes for the animation, the starting and stopping animation. So if you hit Ctrl T in the timeline area, you will switch between this keyframe timeline and curve timeline. So let's switch to this here, and we can expand this and look at these keyframes a bit. So the keyframes we need to look at are mostly the location keyframes, because that's what we are animating, the position from here and here. So we can switch off the rotation since we don't need that, the scale, and yeah. So you can see this is the animation for the keyframes for this animated part. So we don't need to see those as well. So you can hit full stop to expand the curves that you want to see, and we can start examining the different keyframes. So one problem that we're seeing here is that because we are using this Bezier type of animation curve, the animation starts a bit slow and then increases and then slows down as we come to the final keyframe, and that kind of reduces the velocity that will be transported or extended to the rigid body as the initial velocity. So the first thing we can do is clear that spline Bezier kind of curve and change it to a linear type of curve, so that we don't have any slowing down and then accelerating and then slowing down effect, so that we only have a linear type of animation or a constant speed, so that we maintain the velocity around that. Sorry, we maintain the acceleration of whatever is, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, just make sure that you set these curves to vector instead of Bezier splines. So you just hit V and then select the handle types to vector, so that you maintain the velocity to be the same. So if we play back, it's still the same. It's still dropping off because, let me first make sure that this kinetic, this here is hidden here, and we can also turn off, I think we are animating this red line, so which is the X location, so we can switch off all of the others, so that we only have to deal with this here. And I think if you move it up a bit, just this other keyframe, this last keyframe, moving it up is a way of increasing the final speed, so that it accelerates as it goes up. So let's play back. This will also increase the initial velocity. You can see, but now it's too much, I think, so we need to drop it down just a notch. Okay, that is too slow. I'm not sure. That's too slow again. That's too fast. Let's examine these keyframes and see. Maybe we can bring these keyframes a bit closer. Okay, that's too fast. So we can go back, Control Tab, maybe bring this. I think that's good enough, but I think it's still too fast. That's too slow. What we can do maybe is also bring up the Z, this Z position, so that the ball starts off a bit higher, so that instead of hitting this bucket in the middle, it can hit it around here. And I think that would give us a better. Also, just select. Let me hide the X. We are almost getting it. Just need to pull this down a bit. Let's try increasing the weight of the ball of this, and maybe reduce on the velocity of this ball. I think that's good enough. And maybe we can increase the friction a bit, so that this doesn't bounce off. I don't know if this weight here does much, because it's kind of, I don't think it's affecting the bucket that much, the simulation that much. Maybe you can also, by the way, reducing the distance between these two keyframes also speeds up the animation of the ball, and expanding the distance between these keyframes also increases, will reduce the velocity of the ball. And I think yeah, I think that's okay. I don't know. You know what? I'm just going to use Let me see from up. Maybe if we move this in the y direction, so that it doesn't hit the bucket directly. Also make sure that everything is set to vector. Go back, Control Tab to go back. Yeah, I think that is better. Yeah, so we are done with the physics simulation. In the next part, we'll look at how to simulate the fluid object, the fluid itself spilling off. So I'll save this, and if you want this project, you can subscribe to my Patreon account, and I'll send it to you directly. So I'll call this bucket fluid sim. Yeah, thank you for watching.